On Thanksgiving morning, I woke up to a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. My son Jason, his wife Monica, and my 4 grandchildren had flown to Hawaii without me. They left me with nothing but a frozen dinner and a sticky note on the refrigerator. I did not cry. I did not call them to beg for an explanation. Instead, I walked into my office and saw a notification that would turn my sadness into a cold, calculated rage. They had not just abandoned me. They had financed their betrayal with my own money. 5 days later, when they returned with tan lines and empty wallets, they found their keys did not work. They found plywood over the windows. They found a sold sign on the lawn. And when my son screamed my name from the street, he realized that the father he knew was gone. In his place stood Bernard Blackwood, the ruthless CEO who had just executed the most personal, hostile takeover of his life. Before I tell you how I dismantled their lives piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone exactly who paid for the roof over their head. The silence was the first thing that hit me. It was 6 in the morning on Thanksgiving Day. For 40 years, this house had smelled of roasting turkey sage stuffing and brewing coffee by this hour. My late wife Catherine used to start cooking at dawn, filling these halls with warmth and anticipation. Since she passed, I tried to keep the tradition alive for Jason and his family. I paid for the groceries. I paid for the decorations. I even paid for a private chef to come later in the day so Monica would not have to lift a finger. But today, the air was stale. It smelled of dust and old floor wax. There was no sound of children running down the hallway. There was no clattering of pans in the kitchen. I sat up in bed, my joints stiff from the November cold seeping through the windows. I checked my phone on the nightstand. No messages. No missed calls. Just the date staring back at me. November 23rd. I put on my robe and walked out into the hallway. The door to the guest wing where Jason and Monica stayed was open. I walked in. The beds were stripped. The closets were empty. The toys that usually littered the floor were gone. It was as if they had never been there. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. Had something happened? Was there an emergency? I moved faster now, ignoring the ache in my knees. I went downstairs to the kitchen. The granite countertops were bare. The massive Viking range was cold and clean. There was no chef. There was no food prep. There was just a single neon yellow post-it note stuck to the stainless steel door of the refrigerator. It was the kind of cheap stationery Monica bought in bulk. I pulled it off and read the scribbled handwriting. "Dad, we decided to go to Hawaii last minute. The kids really needed some sun, and the flight deals were too good to pass up. We could not get a ticket for you on such short notice, and honestly, we figured the travel would be too hard on your hips anyway. There are some frozen dinners in the freezer. We will see you next week. Happy Thanksgiving." I read the note twice. Then I read it a third time. I did not feel sadness. I did not feel the sting of rejection that a weaker man might have felt. I felt a sudden, sharp clarity. They had not just left. They had fled. They used my hips as an excuse, a convenient lie to cover their selfishness. I looked at the note again. It was not even a card. It was a scrap of paper they probably wrote while waiting for their Uber. I walked over to the security system panel on the wall. I needed to see this. I needed to witness the exit. I rewound the footage to 4 in the morning. The black and white video showed the truth that the yellow note tried to hide. I saw Jason dragging 2 massive suitcases down the stairs. I saw Monica herding the 4 sleep-drunk children toward the door. They were not rushing because of an emergency. They were sneaking. They moved with the guilty stealth of thieves. I turned up the volume on the monitor. The high-quality microphones I had installed years ago picked up their whispers clearly. "Hurry up, Jason," Monica hissed, adjusting her designer sunglasses indoors. If he wakes up, we are never going to get out of here. I cannot deal with another week of his stories. He is deaf in one ear. Monica, he will sleep through it. Jason whispered back, struggling with a golf bag. I watched my son, the boy I had educated, the man I had appointed as a director in my company, laughing as he quietly closed the front door. And then came the line that killed the last shred of softness in my heart. As they stood on the porch waiting for their ride, Monica checked her reflection in the window. God, I am so glad we are leaving, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. That house smells like old people and failure. I need a Mai Tai immediately. Jason chuckled. Just make sure you blocked his number on the kids' iPads. I do not want him guilt-tripping them while we are at the pool. The car arrived. They loaded the luggage. They drove away into the pre-dawn darkness. I stood there in my empty kitchen, the video playing on a loop. Old people and failure. That house was a $3 million estate in Connecticut. That smell she despised was the scent of the mahogany and leather that I had paid for. I looked at the freezer. I opened it. Inside was a single box of frozen lasagna covered in frost. That was my Thanksgiving feast. That was the value they placed on me. I walked into my study, my sanctuary. I sat behind the heavy oak desk that had served as my command center for 3 decades of corporate warfare. I was Bernard Blackwood. I had built a logistics empire from a single truck. I had negotiated with union leaders, hostile boards, and federal regulators. I had destroyed competitors who tried to undercut me. And yet, I had allowed my own son to treat me like a senile dependent. I opened my laptop. I needed to check the accounts. If they had booked a last-minute trip to Hawaii for 6 people during Thanksgiving week, it would have cost a fortune. Jason constantly complained about his salary. Monica constantly complained about the cost of private school. Where did the money come from? I logged into my primary banking portal. Everything looked normal in the checking accounts. Then I clicked on the credit card tab. I had a specific card, a black Amex, that I kept for catastrophic emergencies. It was hidden in the safe in the library. The code was supposed to be known only to me. I saw the pending transaction at the top of the list. It was time-stamped 5 hours ago. 4 Seasons Resort, Maui, at Wailea. Amount $45,000. I stared at the number. $45,000. They had not just booked a room. They had booked a suite. They had booked the penthouse. They had likely prepaid for spa treatments, private dinners, and cabanas. They had stolen my emergency card, the one reserved for life-or-death situations, and used it to finance their escape from me. I felt a coldness spread from my chest to my fingertips. This was not just a lack of love. This was a felony. This was grand larceny committed by the people who shared my last name. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The image of Jason struggling with the golf bag played in my mind. He had looked so happy. He had looked so relieved to be stealing from his father. I did not scream. I did not throw the laptop across the room. I was a businessman, and I was looking at a bad investment. For 42 years, I had invested in Jason. Private schools, tutors, Ivy League tuition, a down payment on his first house, a job he was barely qualified for. I had poured millions into him, hoping for a return in the form of character, integrity, and family loyalty. The return on investment was zero. Actually, it was negative $45,000. I picked up my phone. My hand was steady. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Sal. Sal was 70 years old, a former Marine combat engineer who ran the best security and locksmith company in the state. He had fortified my warehouses in the 80s. He had been one of the few people who looked me in the eye at Catherine's funeral and told me the truth about grief. He was not just a tradesman. He was a soldier. I pressed call. It rang twice. Bernard Sal's gravelly voice answered. It is Thanksgiving morning. The house better be on fire. It is not on fire, Sal, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. But I have a security breach. I need you here in 30 minutes. Sal paused. I could hear the background noise of his own family breakfast. Is it the alarm system? No, I said. I need a total lockdown. I want every lock on the perimeter changed. I want the gate codes scrubbed. I want the windows secured. And Sal, bring your truck. I have a lot of debris that needs to be removed from the second floor. There was a silence on the line. Sal knew Jason. Sal knew Monica. He knew exactly who lived on the second floor. Are you sure about this? Bernard Sal asked, his voice dropping an octave. Once we turn those bolts, there is no going back. I looked at the frozen lasagna sitting on my desk. I looked at the notification for the $45,000 charge. I have never been more sure of anything in my life, I replied. Bring the heavy-duty drills, Sal. We are scrubbing the facility. I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was fully up now, casting long, cold shadows across the manicured lawn. The lawn where my grandchildren played. The lawn where Jason had learned to catch a football. It looked different to me now. It looked like a battlefield. I walked back to the kitchen. I took the yellow Post-it note off the refrigerator. I did not crumple it. I folded it neatly and placed it in my breast pocket. It was evidence. It was motivation. It was the declaration of war. I opened the refrigerator one last time. I took out the bottle of vintage champagne I had been saving for the toast today. I popped the cork. The sound echoed in the empty house like a gunshot. I poured a glass and drank it standing up. It tasted crisp and cold. Then I went to the mudroom and put on my heavy work boots. I had a lot of work to do before Sal arrived. I walked up the stairs to the second floor, the guest wing that Jason and Monica had slowly turned into their permanent residence over the last 5 years. They called it staying for a while to help me. I now realized it was an occupation. I opened the door to their master suite. It was a mess. Clothes were strewn everywhere. Jewelry boxes were open. It smelled of Monica's expensive perfume and Jason's incompetence. I grabbed a black contractor bag from the closet. I started with Monica's vanity. I swept her creams, her lotions, her hundreds of dollars of makeup into the bag. I did not organize it. I did not check for breakables. I treated it exactly as she had treated my dignity. Like garbage. I moved to the closet. I pulled Jason's suits off the hangers. The suits I had bought him for his interviews. The suits he wore to the office where he did nothing but pretend to work. I stuffed them into the bags. I worked with a mechanical efficiency. Bag after bag filled up. I dragged them to the landing at the top of the stairs. By the time the doorbell rang, I had 12 bags lined up. I was sweating. My heart rate was elevated, but not from stress, from adrenaline. I felt stronger than I had in years. I opened the front door. Sal stood there holding a cordless drill like a weapon. He looked at me. Then he looked past me at the pile of black bags at the top of the stairs. He did not ask any questions. He simply nodded. Where do you want to start? Sal asked. Start with the front door, I said. I want a biometric lock. Fingerprint only. My fingerprint only. And Sal, disable the keypad. I do not want them guessing the code. Sal got to work. The sound of the drill biting into the wood was the most satisfying sound I had heard all morning. It was the sound of boundaries being drawn. It was the sound of authority being reclaimed. While Sal worked on the doors, I went back to the second floor. I had cleared the surfaces, but now I needed to check the hiding spots. Monica was a hoarder of secrets. I knelt down by the bed and lifted the dust ruffle. There were shoe boxes stacked underneath. I pulled one out. It felt heavy. I opened the lid. It was not shoes. It was paper. Stacks of paper. I pulled out the top sheet. It was a pawn shop receipt. Dated 3 months ago. Item description: diamond tennis bracelet, 3 carats. My breath hitched. That was Catherine's bracelet. I had given it to Monica on her wedding day, a gesture of welcoming her into the family. She had pawned it. I dug deeper. Another receipt. Item description: vintage Rolex men's gold. That was my retirement watch. The one I thought I had lost 2 years ago. I had torn the house apart looking for it. Jason had helped me look. He had patted my back and said, "You probably left it at the club, Dad. Your memory isn't what it used to be." He had lied to my face while the pawn ticket was sitting under his bed. I found a third receipt. Item description: silver flatware set service for 12. Catherine's grandmother's silver. The silver we used for Christmas dinner. Gone. I sat on the floor surrounded by the evidence of their looting. They had not just been using my credit cards. They had been selling my history. They had been dismantling my legacy piece by piece, turning heirlooms into cash to fund their lifestyle. I felt a tear run down my cheek. It was hot and angry. I wiped it away furiously. This was not the time for grief. This was the time for liquidation. I stood up holding the box of receipts. I walked out to the landing where Sal was now changing the lock on the master suite door. "Sal," I said. My voice was low and dangerous. "Yeah, Bernard," he asked, not looking up from his work. "Change of plans," I said. "Do not just put the bags in the garage. Call your guys. Call the junk haulers. I want everything gone." "Everything?" Sal asked, pausing. "Everything," I confirmed. "The furniture, the clothes, the toys, the electronics. If it is in this wing, it goes. I want this floor bare down to the subfloor." Sal looked at me. He saw the box in my hands. He saw the look in my eyes. He understood. "Consider it done, boss," he said. I walked downstairs to my office. I placed the box of pawn receipts on my desk, next to the frozen lasagna. I took out my phone. It was time to make the first call. Not to Jason. Not yet. I called the fraud department of American Express. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," the representative answered. "Happy Thanksgiving. How can I help you?" "I need to report a theft," I said. "My emergency card has been stolen." "Oh, I am so sorry to hear that," the representative said. "We show a large transaction pending in Maui." "Was that you?" "That was not me," I said. "That was unauthorized use. I want you to flag it as fraud. I want you to cancel the card immediately. And I want you to contact the resort and inform them that the payment method is invalid and stolen." "Sir, if we do that, the hotel will likely lock the guests out of the room and involve the police," the representative warned. "It could be a very difficult situation for whoever is using the card." I looked at the pawn receipt for my wife's bracelet. I thought about Monica's voice calling my home a place of failure. "That is exactly what I am counting on," I said. "Do it." I hung up the phone. The first domino had been pushed. Now I just had to wait for the crash. I sat there in the silence of my study, the only sound the distant whirring of Sal's drill upstairs. I pulled the yellow post-it note from my pocket and smoothed it out on the desk. "Happy Thanksgiving," I whispered to the empty room. My phone rang. It was Jason. The caller ID showed a picture of him smiling at his college graduation, a picture I had taken with such pride. I stared at it. The face was the same, but the person I thought I knew was a stranger. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to wonder why his old senile father wasn't picking up immediately. I swiped the green button and put the phone to my ear. I said nothing. I just listened to the background noise of the airport wind and the tropical announcements. Dad Jason's voice came through breezy and fake. "Hey, did you get our note? I tried to call earlier, but the signal was bad. We just landed. It is paradise here." I leaned back in my leather chair. I looked at the ceiling. I got the note. "Jason," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "Frozen lasagna. Very thoughtful." "Yeah, sorry about that." Jason laughed, a nervous, dismissive sound. It was just such a spur-of-the-moment thing. Monica needed a break. "You know how stressed she gets." "I know," I said. "It must be very stressful pawning your mother-in-law's jewelry. That kind of work takes a toll on a person." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. The airport noise seemed to fade away. What Jason stammered. "What did you say? I found the box, Jason," I said. "Under the bed. The bracelet. My Rolex. The silver. I have the receipts." "Dad, wait, I can explain." Jason's voice pitched up, panic setting in. "We didn't sell them. We borrowed against them. I was going to get them back next month. It was a liquidity issue." "A liquidity issue," I repeated. "Is that what you call stealing from your father to pay for a vacation you cannot afford?" "It's not stealing," Jason shouted. "It's family assets. I am your only son. It's all going to be mine eventually anyway." And there it was. The truth. He didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a bank account with a pulse. A waiting room for his inheritance. "Not anymore," I said. "Dad, listen to me," Jason pleaded. "We can talk about this when I get back. We just landed. The kids are excited. Let's just have a nice week," and I cut him off. "There is no nice week, Jason. I just got off the phone with American Express. I reported the card as stolen." What Jason screamed. "Dad, no. We used that card for the hotel. We used it for everything. If you cancel it, they'll decline us at check-in." "I know," I said. "I hope you brought cash." "Dad, you can't do this. We don't have any other cards with that limit. We are in Hawaii. We have the kids." "You should have thought about that before you stole $45,000 from me," I said. "You should have thought about that before you called my house a place of failure." "You heard that," Jason whispered. "I heard everything I said. Enjoy the frozen lasagna, son." I hung up the phone. I didn't just press the red button. I turned the phone completely off. I placed it face down on the desk. Upstairs, the sound of heavy boots echoed. Sal walked into the study. He was wiping his hands on a rag. "Locks are done," Bernard, Sal said. "And the junk crew is here. They are backing the truck up to the garage. You want them to start now?" "Yes," I said. "Start now." Sal nodded and turned to leave, but he stopped at the door. "You okay, Bernard?" he asked softly. I looked at the pawn receipts. I looked at the black screen of my phone. "I am fine, Sal," I said. "I am just cleaning house." Sal left. I heard the truck beep as it reversed. I heard the heavy thud of the front door closing a door that now required my fingerprint to open. I stood up and walked to the wall safe hidden behind the portrait of Catherine. I spun the dial. I opened the heavy steel door. Inside were the deeds, the trust documents, and the corporate charters. I pulled out the blue folder marked the Catherine Blackwood Trust. This was the nuclear option. This was the document I had hoped never to use. The house did not belong to me. It did not belong to Jason. It belonged to the trust Catherine had set up before she died. She had been worried about Jason's lack of ambition. She had insisted on a clause, Clause 12. If the beneficiary demonstrates gross negligence, moral turpitude, or hostility toward the trustee shall have the power to liquidate the assets and redirect the proceeds to a charitable organization of their choice. I was the trustee. Jason was the beneficiary, and he had just demonstrated all three conditions in a single morning. I took the folder to my desk. I picked up my landline, the old heavy receiver feeling solid in my hand. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Whitman," I said when the voice answered. "Bernard, it's Thanksgiving. Are you calling to wish me well?" Mr. Whitman asked. He was my corporate attorney and my oldest friend. "No," I said. "I am calling to activate Clause 12. There was a long pause. Whitman knew what that meant. "Are you sure?" Whitman asked. "That is the scorched earth protocol, Bernard. That means selling the house. That means cutting Jason off completely." "I am sure," I said. "I want the house listed, not on the market. Call the investors. Call the 'we buy ugly houses' people. Call the cash buyers. I want it sold in 48 hours." "Bernard, you will get pennies on the dollar if you sell that fast," Whitman warned. "That estate is worth $1.5 million. A cash buyer will offer you $900,000 tops. I do not care about the price," I said. "I care about the speed. I want the title transferred before they get on a plane back from Hawaii. I want them to come home to a house they do not own." "Understood?" Whitman said, his tone shifting to professional steel. "I will make the calls. I will have the paperwork ready for you to sign tomorrow morning." "Thank you," I said. And Bernard Whitman added, "Yes, happy Thanksgiving. Same to you," I said. I hung up. The plan was in motion. I looked out the window again. The junk crew was carrying Monica's vanity out to the truck. They were tossing it onto a pile of trash bags. It landed with a crash of breaking mirror glass. I watched it shatter. It was beautiful. I went to the kitchen and made myself a sandwich. Peanut butter and jelly. It was the best meal I had eaten in months because I ate it in a house that was finally truly mine again. The silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. It was the silence of a fortress after the drawbridge has been raised. I sat there chewing slowly, thinking about the chaos that was currently unfolding 5,000 miles away in a hotel lobby in Maui. I imagined the declined card. I imagined the public embarrassment. I imagined Monica screaming at a receptionist who could do nothing. I took another bite of my sandwich. Revenge, I realized, is a dish best served with peanut butter. The sound of Sal's industrial drill screaming against the brass lock of the front door was the only music I needed on Thanksgiving morning. Metal shavings curled onto the welcome mat like dead leaves. With a final grinding crack, the old mechanism gave way. Sal pulled the cylinder out and tossed it into his tool bucket. It landed with a heavy clunk. That was the sound of my son's key becoming a useless piece of scrap metal. Sal looked up at me, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He did not smile. He did not offer empty platitudes. He simply nodded toward the driveway, where a massive battered box truck was backing up. The side of the truck read "Junk Kings" in peeling red letters. I had not called a white glove moving service. I had not called a storage company that would wrap items in tissue paper and bubble wrap. I had called a removal crew, the kind of men you hire when you want a hoarding situation cleared out in an afternoon. The air brakes hissed. The driver, a man with forearms the size of tree trunks, jumped down. He held a clipboard. "Mr. Blackwood," he grunted, "you ordered the full estate clean-out for the second floor." "I did," I replied, stepping out onto the porch. The cold air felt good against my flushed skin. "Just to be clear," the foreman said, eyeing the manicured lawn and the Mercedes in the driveway, "we do not sort. We do not organize. We load. Once it goes in the truck, it is considered refuse. We take it to the transfer station, or we auction it by the pound. You okay with that?" I looked at the second-floor window, the window to the master suite where Monica had likely spent this very morning, packing her bikini and laughing at my expense. "I am more than okay with that," I said. "I want that floor stripped to the studs. If it is not architectural, it goes." The foreman signaled his crew. 4 men marched past me into the foyer. They wore heavy work boots that left faint mud tracks on the marble. Yesterday, I would have rushed to wipe them up. Today, I watched the mud with satisfaction. It was a sign of industry. It was a sign of change. I followed them upstairs. I wanted to watch. I needed to witness the dismantling of the shrine my son and his wife had built to themselves. They started in Monica's dressing room. This was a room that used to be my wife Catherine's sewing room. Monica had demanded we renovate it 3 years ago because she needed space for her influencer lifestyle. She had filled it with mirrors, ring lights, and shelves of products she never used. One of the crew members grabbed a handful of designer dresses from the rack. These were gowns that cost $2,000 apiece. Gowns I had likely paid for through supplemental credit card payments I had ignored. He bunched them together like dirty laundry and shoved them into a rough cardboard wardrobe box. He did not fold them. He jammed them down with his fist to make room for more. I heard the snap of a plastic hanger. I saw the silk of a Valentino blouse snag on the edge of the box. "Careful," I said instinctively, said. The worker stopped and looked at me. "You want us to save it?" I looked at the blouse. I remembered the day Monica bought it. She had worn it to a brunch where she spent the entire meal making fun of my cane. "No," I corrected myself, my voice hardening. "I meant be careful with the box. I do not want it to rip before it gets to the truck. Jam it in harder." The worker shrugged and shoved a pair of Jimmy Choo heels on top of the silk. The heel pierced the fabric. I felt a surge of dark, cold pleasure in my chest. It was intoxicating. For years I had walked on eggshells in my own house, terrified of upsetting Monica, terrified of Jason's sighs and eye rolls. I had treated their possessions like holy relics, while they treated my existence like a nuisance. Now the balance was correcting itself. They moved to the bathroom. The counter was covered in glass jars of expensive creams, serums, and perfumes. La Mer, Chanel, Dior, thousands of dollars of chemical vanity. The foreman swept his arm across the counter. The bottles clattered into a plastic bin with a deafening crash of breaking glass and cracking plastic. The smell of 100 perfumes mixing together filled the air. It was a cloying, expensive stench. "Trash or donate?" the foreman asked, looking at the mess of broken glass and half-used lotions. "Trash," I said. "All of it." I walked into the bedroom. 2 men were dismantling the California King bed frame. Jason had insisted on this bed. He said he had back problems. He said he needed the best mattress money could buy. I had written the check for $8,000. Now I watched as they unscrewed the bolts and let the heavy headboard slam onto the floor. They dragged the mattress across the hardwood, not bothering to lift it. It swept away the dust bunnies and the secrets hiding underneath. "Take the sheets too," I ordered, "and the pillows. I do not want anything left that holds their scent." I stood in the doorway, leaning on my cane, watching my life being reclaimed one box at a time. It was violent. It was messy. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. One of the men picked up a framed photo from the nightstand. It was a picture of Jason and Monica in Paris. I had paid for that trip too. It was supposed to be their 5th anniversary gift. They looked happy. They looked rich. They looked like they didn't have a care in the world because they had a father who paid for everything. The man looked at the photo, then looked at me. "Family?" he asked. I looked at the smiling faces. I looked at the eyes that had lied to me for decades. "No," I said. "Tenants, bad tenants." The man tossed the frame into a box filled with electronics. I heard the glass crack. The hallway began to fill with boxes, a wall of brown cardboard rising up like a barricade. Inside those boxes was the life my son had built on my back. His collection of vintage sneakers, his gaming consoles, his humidor, Monica's yoga equipment, her collection of handbags that she claimed were investments. I watched a limited edition Louis Vuitton bag, the one she had screamed at my housekeeper for touching, get flattened under a box of heavy books. I walked over to the pile. I reached out and touched the cardboard. It felt rough and real. Mr. Blackwood Sal called from the bottom of the stairs. "Front door is secured. Back door is done. I am moving to the garage keypads. You want me to reset the remotes too?" "Reset everything, Sal," I called back. "If it opens a door, change it. I want this house to be a fortress." I turned back to the bedroom. The men were moving the rug now. It was a heavy Persian rug that had been in my family for 3 generations. Monica had moved it up here because she said it made the living room look dated. "Roll it up," the foreman commanded. As they lifted the edge of the rug, something caught my eye. There was a loose floorboard near the wall. It wasn't just loose. It was pried up slightly. "Hold on," I said. The men stopped. I walked over to the corner. I used the tip of my cane to nudge the wood. It moved. It was a hiding spot. "Move the rug," I ordered. They dragged the heavy wool carpet away. I knelt down, my knees popping in the silence. I pried the board up with my fingers. Beneath the floor, tucked into the insulation, was a shoebox. A plain orange Nike shoebox. I pulled it out. It was heavy. It rattled. The foreman looked at me. "You want that in the truck, too?" I sat back on my heels, the box on my lap. I had a feeling in my gut, a cold, sinking feeling that told me I had only scratched the surface of their betrayal. "Not yet," I said softly. "Leave this with me." I stood up, clutching the box to my chest. The room was almost empty now. The echoes were returning, but they were my echoes. "Finish up here," I told the crew. "I want the walls bare. I want the closets empty. When you are done, sweep the floors. I do not want to see a single bobby pin left behind." I walked out of the room and headed downstairs to my study. The box felt like a bomb in my hands. I placed it on my desk next to the pawn receipts I had found earlier. I took a deep breath. The house vibrated with the heavy footsteps of the men upstairs, the thud of boxes being loaded onto the truck, the sound of my son's life being hauled away to the dump. I sat down and put my hand on the lid of the orange box. I knew that whatever was inside would hurt. I knew it would justify everything I had done and everything I was about to do. I lifted the lid, and the air left the room. Inside the orange Nike shoebox, there were no sneakers. There was no cash. There was only paper. A chaotic, crumpled nest of thermal receipts and carbon copy slips, some yellowing with age, others crisp and white, dating back only a few days. My hands trembled as I reached in. The texture of the cheap paper felt abrasive against my fingertips. I pulled out the stack. It was thick, perhaps 50 or 60 individual slips held together by a rubber band. I snapped the band. It broke dry and brittle, stinging my thumb. The papers spilled across the mahogany desk, a landslide of evidence. I picked up the first one. It was from a place called Quick Cash Pawn and Loan in the city, dated November 20th, 3 days ago. Item description: vintage platinum brooch, diamond and sapphire Art Deco. Loan amount $1,200. The air left my lungs. I knew that brooch. I knew it intimately. I had bought it for Catherine in London for our 30th anniversary. It was one of the first truly expensive pieces I could afford after the company went public. I remembered the way her eyes had filled with tears when I pinned it to her dress. I remembered her wearing it to the opera, her hand resting on it, as if checking it was still there. She called it her blue star. It was worth $15,000, and Monica had pawned it for $1,200. $1,200. That was probably the cost of the first-class upgrade they had purchased for the flight to Maui. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. I swallowed hard, forcing the bile down. I picked up another receipt. Item description: South Sea pearl necklace. 18mm strand. Loan amount $800. Catherine's pearls. The ones she wore to Jason's graduation. The ones she wore in our last family portrait before the cancer took her. She had left them to Monica in her will, with a handwritten note that said, "Wear these when you need to feel strong." Monica had not worn them. She had sold them to a strip mall pawnbroker to pay for what, a spa treatment. A new handbag. The disrespect was so profound, so absolute, that it felt like a physical assault. It wasn't just theft. It was desecration. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had exhumed my wife and stripped her corpse for pocket change. I began to sort through the pile, my movements frantic. I needed to know the extent of the damage. I needed to know how much of my life was currently sitting in a dusty safe in a bad part of town. Receipt after receipt. The ruby earrings I gave Catherine when Jason was born. Gone. The gold charm bracelet she had built over 40 years, adding a charm for every major life event. Gone. The antique locket that held a picture of her mother. Gone. Then I found the one that broke me. It was a receipt dated yesterday, the day before Thanksgiving. Item description: men's gold wedding band inscribed Forever C&B. Loan amount $300. My vision blurred. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was being crushed by a hydraulic press. That was my wedding ring. I had taken it off 6 months ago because my fingers had swollen from arthritis. I had placed it in the small velvet box on my dresser, intending to get it resized. I checked for it every morning, just touching the box to know it was there. I hadn't opened the box in weeks. I just assumed it was safe. I stood up my chair, scraping violently against the floor. I grabbed my cane and limped as fast as I could to the wall safe behind the portrait. My hands were shaking so badly I missed the combination twice. Finally, the tumbler clicked. I swung the heavy door open. Inside, the velvet boxes were stacked neatly. It looked orderly. It looked safe. I grabbed the blue velvet box that should have held the sapphire brooch. I opened it. Empty. I grabbed the long flat case for the pearls. Empty. I grabbed the small square box where my wedding ring should have been. I opened it. It wasn't empty. Inside, resting on the white satin cushion, was a ring. But it wasn't my heavy gold band. It was a cheap gold-plated washer, a piece of hardware store junk. They had swapped it. They hadn't just stolen it. They had replaced it with a decoy so that if I glanced inside, I wouldn't notice immediately. It was a calculated, malicious deception. It meant they had planned this. It meant they had discussed it. It meant Jason had looked at his father's wedding ring, the symbol of the marriage that created him, and decided it was worth $300 of spending money for a vacation. I collapsed onto the floor of my study, clutching the cheap washer in my hand. A guttural sound escaped my throat, a sound halfway between a sob and a growl. For 10 years, I had mourned Catherine. I had kept this house as a museum to our life together. I had allowed Jason and Monica to live here because I thought it would keep her memory alive. I thought having family around would fill the void she left. But they were not family. They were parasites. They were termites eating away the foundation of my life while smiling at me across the dinner table. I looked at the pile of receipts on my desk. There were dozens of them. They had been doing this for months, maybe years. They had been systematically liquidating my history. They were erasing Catherine. I closed my fist around the fake ring. The metal bit into my palm. The pain was sharp and grounding. The sadness began to evaporate. It burned off like mist under a high noon sun, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I was no longer the grieving widower. I was no longer the lonely old man grateful for scraps of attention. I was the man who had negotiated union contracts with mobsters in the 80s. I was the man who had stared down bankruptcy and won. I was Bernard Blackwood, and I had just found the ammunition I needed to go to war. I pulled myself up using the desk. I stood tall. I looked at the portrait of Catherine. Her eyes seemed to follow me. She looked sad, but she also looked firm. She had never tolerated liars. "I am sorry, Catherine," I whispered to the painting. "I let them in, but I promise you I am going to throw them out." I gathered the receipts. I did not put them back in the shoebox. I laid them out on the desk, organizing them by date, by amount, by item. I was building a case file. I was preparing the indictment. I went to the kitchen and got a glass of water. My throat was dry as dust. I drank it in one gulp. Then I walked back to the study and sat down. I placed my phone in the center of the desk, right next to the receipt for my wedding ring. I knew Jason would call. He would have landed by now. He would have tried to check in. He would have found out about the card. He would be angry. He would be entitled. He would think he could talk his way out of this, just like he had talked his way out of every mistake he had ever made. But he didn't know about the shoebox. He didn't know I had the map of his betrayal spread out before me. I stared at the phone, willing it to ring. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. I wanted him to call. I wanted to hear his voice. I wanted to hear the panic set in when he realized that the bank of Dad wasn't just closed. It had been foreclosed. The silence in the house was absolute. The junk crew had finished upstairs. The rooms were empty. The secrets were exposed. And then the screen of my phone lit up. Jason. I looked at the name. I didn't answer immediately. I let it ring. Once. Twice. 3 times. I took a deep breath, visualizing the pawn ticket for the sapphire brooch. I visualized the fake ring in the velvet box. I picked up the phone. I didn't say hello. I didn't ask how Hawaii was. I pressed the button and held the device to my ear, waiting for the first lie to spill out of his mouth. "Dad, we made it." Jason's voice boomed through the speaker, overly loud, and saturated with a synthetic cheerfulness that grated against my ear. I could hear the island breeze in the background, the chime of the airport arrival announcements, and the distant squeals of my grandchildren, excited to be in paradise. The contrast between his sunny, carefree reality and the cold, dismantled room I stood in was sharp enough to draw blood. "Hey, did you get the note?" he continued, not waiting for a response, rushing through his script. "I know it was last minute, but Monica was just on the verge of a breakdown, and we saw this deal and we figured you would be fine for a few days. You know how much you value your quiet time." He paused, waiting for me to play my part. He expected me to be the passive, understanding father. He expected me to say, "It is okay, son, have fun." He expected the doormat he had walked on for 40 years. "I found the shoebox, Jason," I said. The silence that followed was instant and absolute. The tropical background noise seemed to drop away, leaving only the static of the connection. It wasn't a confused silence. It was a guilty one. It was the silence of a man who realizes the lock on his closet has been broken. "What box?" he asked, his voice dropping, the cheerfulness evaporating like water on a hot stove. "The Nike box under the floorboard." I replied, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor that usually shook my hands. "The one with the receipts from the pawn shop on 4th Street. I have the tickets, Jason. Catherine's pearls. The sapphire brooch. My retirement watch." "Dad, wait. You have to understand." He stammered the words, tripping over each other. "We didn't sell them. We just pawned them. It is a short-term loan. I have a bonus coming in January. I was going to get them all back before you even noticed. It was a cash flow issue. We just needed liquidity for the deposits." "You pawned your mother's legacy for liquidity?" I asked. "You swapped my wedding ring for a gold-plated washer from a hardware store for liquidity." I picked up the cheap piece of metal from my desk and squeezed it. That was low. "Dad, you shouldn't have been snooping in our room." He deflected his tone, shifting from fear to defensive anger. "We have a right to privacy." "You have a right to privacy in a house you pay for," I cut him off. "You do not have a right to turn my home into a fencing operation." "Look, we can talk about this when I get back," Jason said, his voice tight. "We are at the rental car counter. The kids are tired. I just wanted to check in. We will fix it next week, I promise. Just don't be dramatic." "I am not being dramatic," I said. "I am being practical. Which brings me to the other matter. What other matter? He asked, wary now. I notified American Express this morning, I said. I reported the black card as stolen. There was a pause longer than the first. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the gears turning in his head as the implication hit him. You did what he whispered. I reported it stolen, I repeated. Because it was. I did not authorize a $45,000 vacation. I told them to flag the account for fraud. Dad, no. Jason screamed, abandoning all pretense of composure. We used that card for the reservation. We used it for the rental car. If you reported it stolen, they will decline the hold. I imagine they already have, I said calmly. You have to call them back. You have to authorize it. We are 5,000 miles away. We have 4 kids with us, and you cannot strand us here. I am not stranding you, Jason, I said. You are a grown man. You have a job. You have your own credit cards. Surely you can pay for the vacation you booked. You know our cards are maxed out, he yelled. Dad, please. The clerk is looking at me right now. The card just got declined. They are asking for another form of payment. Fix this. I looked at the empty spaces on my walls, where the pictures of my son used to hang. I looked at the boxes of his belongings that were currently being driven to the dump. I cannot fix it, I said. I am just a senile old man, remember? I am just a burden. You should probably use your own liquidity. Dad, don't you hang up, do not. I pulled the phone away from my ear. His voice was tinny and small, a mosquito buzzing against a screen. I pressed the red button. The connection severed. I didn't just hang up. I powered the phone down completely. I watched the screen go black, extinguishing his panic, his entitlement, and his voice. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to save him. I did not feel the pull of the checkbook. I felt a strange, cold sense of balance. He had stolen my past to pay for his present. I had just canceled his future. I did not need to be in Hawaii to witness the destruction of my son's vacation. I watched it unfold from the comfort of my leather armchair in Connecticut, illuminated by the soft blue glow of my laptop screen. It played out in a cascade of digital notifications, a symphony of red alerts that told a story more vivid than any video feed. The first notification arrived at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which meant it was just before check-in at the Four Seasons in Maui. It was an automated email from the fraud department of American Express. It was brief, professional, and devastating. It read simply, Merchant Four Seasons, Wailea. Transaction type attempted charge. Amount $45,000. Status declined. Code 10. Code 10. In the banking world, that is the code for a stolen card. It is the code that tells the merchant do not return the card to the customer. It tells them to call security. It tells them that the person standing at the counter is a thief. I took a sip of my coffee and imagined the scene. I closed my eyes, and I could see it perfectly. I could see Jason standing in the open-air lobby, the humid tropical breeze ruffling his hair, a lei of purple orchids around his neck, feeling like a king. I could see Monica behind him already posting a selfie to Instagram captioning it, Paradise Found, oblivious to the fact that they were about to be evicted from Eden before they even took a bite of the apple. My phone, which I had turned back on but set to silent, began to vibrate against the mahogany desk. It buzzed once, then again. Then it began a continuous angry dance across the wood. The screen lit up with Jason's name. I let it go to voicemail. I watched the transcription feature on my screen convert his panic into text in real time. The first message appeared. Dad, pick up. The card isn't working. The guy is looking at me weird. Just call the bank and tell them it's fine. Dad, please. The desperation was palpable even in text format. He was still in the denial phase. He still thought this was a clerical error, a glitch in the system that his powerful father could fix with the snap of his fingers. He did not realize that I was the one who had built the wall he was crashing into. 5 minutes later, a second voicemail appeared. The transcription was disjointed, broken by background noise. I hit play to listen to the audio. I heard the distinct, polite but firm voice of a hotel manager in the background saying, "Sir, I need you to lower your voice or I will have to ask you to leave the property." Then Jason's voice, high-pitched and cracking. "My dad is the primary account holder. Just call him." Then a scuffling sound. Then Monica's voice, shrill and piercing, cutting through the static. "Give me the phone, Jason," she screamed into the receiver. "Bernard, you old bat, what did you do?" They took the card. The security guard took the black card. He cut it in half right in front of the kids. "Everyone is staring at us. Fix this right now or I swear to God you will never see these children again." I deleted the voicemail without finishing it. I did not need to hear her threats. I had heard them for 10 years. They had lost their power the moment I saw the pawn ticket for Catherine's pearls. The image of the cut credit card brought a dry smile to my lips. The black Amex was made of titanium. You cannot cut it with scissors. The security guard likely had to use heavy-duty shears behind the desk. The physical effort required to destroy my son's status symbol must have been humiliating to watch. The digital trail continued. An email from the airline popped up. My travel agent, whom I had instructed to monitor the situation, forwarded it to me. It was a cancellation notice for their return flights. I hadn't canceled them, but the airline had auto-canceled the itinerary because the card on file, the same stolen card, had been flagged for fraud across the entire network. They were stranded. They were 5,000 miles from home, with no return ticket and no way to pay for one. Then came the texts from the grandchildren's iPads. These were the hardest to see, but I reminded myself that this lesson was necessary. My grandson Leo, 12 years old, and already mimicking his mother's materialism, sent a string of angry emojis. "Grandpa, why are we sitting on the curb? Mom is crying. Dad is yelling at a taxi driver. This sucks." I felt a twinge of guilt, a small phantom pain in my chest, but I suppressed it. I was not the one sitting on the curb. I was not the one who had booked a $45,000 vacation with stolen money. Jason and Monica had put them on that curb. I was merely refusing to pave the street with gold any longer. I watched the financial app on my phone as Jason tried his other cards. It was like watching a man trying to shoot a gun with no bullets. A notification from Visa declined. Over limit. A notification from MasterCard declined. Insufficient funds. A notification from a debit card linked to a joint account I used to subsidize declined. Account frozen. He was running through his entire wallet, swiping card after card at the rental car counter, the taxi stand, perhaps even the hotel bar, in a desperate attempt to buy a bottle of water. Each decline was a hammer blow to his ego. Each beep of the terminal was a reminder that without me, he was financially insolvent. An hour later, the tone of the messages changed. The anger had burned out, replaced by the cold reality of their situation. Jason sent a text. It was not a demand. It was a surrender. "Dad, we have $300 in cash. That is it. The hotel won't let us stay. They threatened to call the police because of the attempted fraud. We are at a Motel 6 near the airport. It is 90 degrees. The AC is broken. The kids are hungry. Please, just transfer $500, just for food." I looked at the text. A Motel 6 near the airport. I knew the area. It was industrial, loud, and far from the beaches. It was a place for flight crews on layovers and people who had made bad life choices. It was fitting. They had traded the Four Seasons for a room that smelled of stale smoke and industrial cleaner. They had traded ocean views for a view of the runway tarmac. I typed a reply. My fingers moved slowly over the keys. I wanted to be precise. I wanted there to be no ambiguity. "You have $300, I wrote. That is enough for peanut butter and jelly. It is what I am having for Thanksgiving dinner. It builds character." Do not contact me again until you have returned my property. I hit send. Then I blocked the number. I blocked Monica's number. I blocked the kids' iPads. I severed the digital umbilical cord. The sun began to set outside my window, casting long shadows across the room where the boxes of their belongings sat waiting for the truck. I imagined them in that cramped motel room. 2 double beds for 6 people. The noise of jets taking off rattling the windows. The realization sinking in that the vacation was over before it began. They were stuck in paradise, but they were in purgatory. I walked to the kitchen to make another sandwich. As I spread the jelly, I thought about the $300 Jason had left. That was exactly the amount he had received for pawning my wedding ring. There was a poetic justice in that. He was now living on the exact value he had placed on my marriage. He would have to stretch those $300 for 5 days. He would have to count every penny. He would have to say no to his children when they asked for ice cream. He would have to feel the crushing weight of financial limitation that he had never felt in his entire privileged life. I took a bite of my sandwich. It tasted like victory. The house was quiet. The phone was silent. The fraud department had done its job. The hotel security had done its job. Now it was time for me to do mine. I had cleared the house. I had cut the funding. But the final blow, the one that would ensure they never came back, was still to come. I had to sell the kingdom before the exiles returned. The drive to Arthur Whitman's estate in Greenwich took 40 minutes. The roads were empty, slick with a cold November rain that turned the asphalt into a black mirror. Most families were gathering around dining tables right now, carving turkeys and arguing about politics. I was driving to a legal war room to carve up my son's inheritance. I had the box of pawn receipts on the passenger seat next to me. It rattled every time I hit a puddle, a constant rhythmic reminder of why I was doing this. So Whitman was waiting for me in his library. He was 75, a man who had forgotten more about estate law than most partners at major firms would ever know. He wore a cardigan and held a tumbler of single malt scotch. There was no festive spread, no holiday music, just a roaring fire and a stack of legal files on his desk. He knew me. He knew that when Bernard Blackwood called on a holiday, it wasn't for pleasantries. "Happy Thanksgiving." "Arthur," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was dry and firm like old parchment. "Bernard," he replied, gesturing to the leather chair opposite his desk. "You sound like a man who just found a termite infestation in his foundation." "Worse," I said. "I found out the termites are my heirs." I placed the orange Nike shoebox on his desk. I opened it and fanned out the receipts. Whitman put on his reading glasses. He picked up the slip for the sapphire brooch. He didn't say a word for a long time. He just read the item description, the date, and the pitiful loan amount. Then he picked up the receipt for my wedding ring. He looked at it, then looked at my hand, noticing the absence of gold for the first time. He put the papers down and took a sip of his scotch. His expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "Catherine would be heartbroken," he said softly. "Catherine suspected this might happen," I corrected him. "That is why she insisted on the trust structure. She loved Jason, but she didn't trust him. She knew he had a hole in his pocket where his character should be." Whitman nodded. He reached for the blue file folder he had prepared. The Catherine Blackwood Revocable Trust. He opened it, revealing pages of dense legal text that we had drafted 15 years ago, back when Jason was failing out of his second startup. "Let's review the mechanism," Arthur, I said. "I want to be absolutely clear on my standing. I do not want him to have a single inch of legal ground to stand on when he gets back." Whitman tapped the document with his pen. "It is ironclad, Bernard. The house is not titled to you personally. It is titled to the trust. You are the sole trustee. Jason is the primary beneficiary, but his interest is contingent. Contingent on what I asked, though I knew the answer. I wanted to hear it aloud. I needed the law to validate my rage." Contingent on the discretion of the trustee, Whitman recited from memory. Clause 12. Section B. The trustee has the fiduciary duty to preserve the assets. If the trustee determines that the beneficiary is engaging in behavior that endangers the estate, including but not limited to gross financial negligence, theft, or substance abuse, the trustee has the power to suspend the beneficiary's rights. He looked at the pawn receipts. Grand larceny and fraud certainly qualify as endangering the estate, Whitman noted dryly. If he is stealing the silverware, he is a liability to the trust. You have a fiduciary duty to stop him. And the liquidation clause, I asked. Whitman turned the page. Clause 14. The trustee has the unilateral power to liquidate any real estate assets held by the trust if deemed necessary for the benefit of the charitable remaindermen. That was the key. The charitable remaindermen. Catherine had set it up so that if Jason failed, the money would go to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. It was her fail-safe. So I said, leaning forward, if I sell the house, the money goes into the trust account. Jason has no claim to the house itself. He only has a claim to the proceeds, and only if I decide to distribute them. Correct, Whitman said. As long as the money stays in the trust, you control it. You can cut off his distributions completely based on his misconduct. He can sue, but with these receipts as evidence of theft against the estate, no judge in Connecticut will grant him a penny. He has unclean hands. Then do it, I said. I want the house sold. Whitman hesitated. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. This was the part where the lawyer stopped being a lawyer and started being a friend. Bernard, selling the house is irrevocable, he warned. That is your home. That is where you lived with Catherine. You are talking about nuking your own living situation just to punish him. You can just evict him. You don't have to sell the property. I shook my head. Eviction takes months, Arthur. You know that. In this state, he could drag it out for 6 months claiming hardship, claiming he has nowhere to go with 4 kids. He would squat in my house eating my food while suing me. I cannot live with him under my roof for another day. I cannot look at him without seeing a thief. But to sell it in 5 days, Whitman asked, you will have to take a massive loss. I do not care about the loss, I said, my voice rising. I care about the erasure. I want him to come back to a house that legally does not exist for him anymore. I want the locks changed, the title transferred, and the ownership severed. I want him to stand on that sidewalk and realize that he has no home to break into. Whitman looked at me for a long moment. He saw the resolve in my face. He saw that I wasn't making a financial decision. I was making a survival decision. Okay, he said. We can do a cash deal. I know an investment group in Hartford. They buy distressed estates, flip them, or rent them out. They will close in 48 hours if the title is clean. But they will lowball you. They will offer $900,000 for a $1.5 million property. Take it, I said immediately. Call them. Tell them I will sign the papers tomorrow morning. Tell them I want a leaseback agreement for myself for 30 days so I can move my things out, but the title transfers immediately. Wait, Whitman paused. You want to stay there for 30 days? I said. I am moving to a hotel, but I want legal possession for 30 days so I can control who enters the property. I do not want the new owners changing the locks until Jason has had his moment on the sidewalk. I want to be the one who denies him entry. Whitman let out a low whistle. That is cold, Bernard. That is absolute zero. He stole my wedding ring, Arthur, I whispered. He stole Catherine's blue star. He left me alone on Thanksgiving with a frozen lasagna while he spent $45,000 of my money on a suite in Maui. Cold is the only temperature I have left. Whitman nodded slowly. He picked up his phone. I will call the investors, he said. I will draft the sale agreement. I will prepare the amendment to the trust removing Jason as a current beneficiary due to criminal misconduct. He paused and looked at the pawn receipts again. "You should report this to the police, Bernard. This is grand larceny. He could go to jail." I looked at the fire crackling in the hearth. I thought about my grandchildren. I thought about the shame of having a son in handcuffs. "Not yet," I said. "The police are a blunt instrument. I want to use a scalpel first. I want him to feel the consequences financially and emotionally. I want him to own the roof over his head. If he fights me, if he tries to sue, then I will give these receipts to the district attorney. But for now, let's just leave him homeless." Whitman dialed the number. He put it on speaker. I listened as he negotiated the sale of my life's work. It took 5 minutes. The investors were hungry. They smelled blood in the water. They agreed to $850,000 cash closing on Monday morning. It was done. I had just lost $650,000 in equity to teach my son a lesson. It was the most expensive education I had ever paid for, but I knew it would be the only one that stuck. I stood up. I felt light. The house was no longer an anchor holding me to the past. It was just an asset I had liquidated. "Thank you, Arthur," I said. Whitman stood up and poured me a glass of scotch. He handed it to me. "To Catherine," he said, raising his glass. "To Catherine," I replied. "And to Clause 12. We drank. The scotch burned warm and reassuring. I had the law on my side. I had the money. And in 48 hours, I would have the check. I left Whitman's house and drove back into the rain. I checked my phone. No new calls. They were probably asleep in their motel room or arguing over who was to blame. They didn't know that the ground had already shifted beneath their feet. They didn't know that the house they planned to return to was already gone. I drove past the entrance to my subdivision. I didn't turn in. I didn't want to go back to the empty house yet. I drove to the Motel 6 by the highway, the same chain where my son was currently staying in Maui. I parked in the lot and looked at the neon sign buzzing in the damp air. I wanted to remember this feeling, the feeling of being on the outside looking in, because soon that would be Jason's permanent address. The investor arrived at 8 in the morning on Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. His name was Miller, and he wore a suit that was too shiny and a watch that was too big. He looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. He walked through my foyer, his eyes scanning the marble floors and the crystal chandelier, calculating his profit margin with every step. I did not offer him coffee. I did not offer him a tour. The house was empty now, the junk crew having stripped the second floor down to the bare walls the night before. The echoes of his footsteps were the only sound in the cavernous space. He ran a hand over the mahogany banister. "Nice bones," he said, his voice slick with false sympathy. "But the market is soft, Mr. Blackwood. Interest rates are up. Inventory is sitting. To move a property of this size in 48 hours cash, only no inspections, well, that is a tall order." He was playing the game. He was trying to devalue the asset to see how desperate I was. He thought I was in financial ruin. He thought I needed the money to pay off a gambling debt or a mistress. He had no idea that I was simply buying the most expensive eviction notice in history. "Cut the theater, Miller," I said, leaning on my cane. "This house appraises for $1.5 million. The roof is slate and less than 5 years old. The HVAC is industrial grade. You know exactly what this is worth." "Give me the number." Miller stopped pacing. He looked at me, then he looked at the empty living room. $850,000, he said. Cash. Wire transfer hits your account Monday morning when the title clears. Closing costs on you. I did not flinch. $850,000. That was a loss of $650,000 in equity. That was enough money to put 4 grandchildren through college. That was enough money to buy a small island. He was robbing me blind, and he knew it. He waited for me to argue. He waited for me to counter at $1 million. He expected a negotiation. "Done," I said. Miller blinked. He actually took a step back, surprised by the lack of resistance. Just like that, he asked, suspicion clouding his eyes. "Why? What is wrong with the foundation? Is there mold behind the drywall?" "There is nothing wrong with the house," I said, my voice cold and flat. "The structure is sound. The rot was in the occupants. I accept your offer on one condition." He narrowed his eyes. "What condition?" "I want a 30-day lease back," I said. "The title transfers Monday. The money transfers Monday. But I retain legal possession and the keys for 30 days. I want it in writing that no one enters this property without my express permission until that 30 days is up, especially not the previous occupants." Miller shrugged. "A leaseback is standard. We can do that. But seriously, Mr. Blackwood, why are you torching 600 grand in equity just to close by Monday?" I looked at the spot on the wall where the family portrait used to hang. I looked at the scratches on the floor where my son had dragged his golf clubs. "I am not selling a house, Miller," I said. "I am buying a lesson, and tuition is expensive." He pulled the contract out of his briefcase. It was a standard investor purchase agreement simplified for speed. I took his pen. I did not hesitate. I signed my name, Bernard Blackwood, on the line. The ink was black and permanent. With that signature, I had legally severed the last physical tie to my son. When he returned from Hawaii, he would not be coming home. He would be trespassing on corporate property. Miller countered, signed. He tore off the yellow copy and handed it to me. "Pleasure doing business with you," he said, though he looked unsettled by the coldness of the transaction. I took the paper. It felt light. It felt like freedom. "Monday morning," I said. "Do not be late with the wire." I walked him to the door and locked it behind him. The house was sold. The clock was ticking. Now I just had to wait for the plane to land. The flight from Honolulu to New York is 10 hours of confinement that can break even the strongest spirits. For my son and his family, it was a purgatory of economy seating crying children and the gnawing hunger of people who had spent their last dollars on a taxi to the airport. They landed at JFK in the gray pre-dawn light of a Tuesday morning. The weather had turned. The crisp autumn air of Thanksgiving had curdled into a wet, freezing mix of rain and snow that coated the tarmac in slush. I watched their arrival through the high-definition lens of the perimeter security cameras I monitored from my laptop in the hotel suite. I had set a notification alert for motion at the front gate. When the ping sounded at 10 in the morning, I set down my coffee and leaned forward. The final act was beginning. A black Uber Suburban pulled up to the curb. It did not pull into the driveway because Sal had changed the gate code and the keypad was now unresponsive to their old combination. The driver, likely annoyed by the delay and the lack of a tip, idled for a moment before the back doors flew open. Jason stepped out first. He was wearing cargo shorts and a thin linen shirt, an outfit designed for the trade winds of Maui, not the biting 30-degree sleet of Connecticut. He looked haggard. His skin was peeling from a sunburn he hadn't protected. His eyes were puffy and red. He shivered violently as the wind hit him, his body curling inward instinctively. He didn't look like a successful executive returning to his estate. He looked like a castaway washed up on a hostile shore. Monica followed him, struggling with the youngest child, who was wailing in that exhausted, high-pitched tone that grates on the nerves. She wore a sarong and sandals. Her toes were already turning pink from the cold. She shouted something at Jason, her breath pluming in the frigid air. Even without audio, I knew the cadence of her complaints. She was blaming him for the weather. She was blaming him for the gate. She was blaming him for the misery of their existence. They began to unload the luggage. The driver did not help. He popped the trunk from the inside and waited. Jason dragged the heavy suitcases onto the wet sidewalk. These were the same bags he had snuck out of the house with 5 days ago, laughing at my expense. Now they looked like millstones around his neck. The Uber drove away, splashing dirty slush onto Jason's legs. He kicked the tire of the departing car in a futile gesture of rage, then slipped on the ice and nearly went down. He regained his balance, grabbed the handles of 2 bags, and trudged toward the pedestrian gate. I switched camera views to the front porch camera. This was the view I had paid $850,000 in equity to see. They walked up the long driveway, a pathetic caravan of shivering tourists. The children were huddled together, pulling beach towels around their shoulders for warmth. They reached the front porch. Jason dropped the bags with a heavy thud. He rubbed his hands together, blowing on them for warmth, and reached into his pocket for his keys. He approached the massive oak door. He didn't look at it closely at first. He just jammed the key toward the lock cylinder, expecting the familiar click and turn that had welcomed him home for 40 years. But the key didn't go in. He tried again, harder this time, scratching the brass plate. He frowned, bending down to look. That was when he saw it. The lock wasn't just changed, it was gone. In its place was a sleek, black, biometric panel, a smooth plate of glass and steel that had no keyhole, no keypad, no way in for a man whose fingerprints were not in the system. "What is wrong with it?" Monica snapped, shivering behind him. "Open the door, Jason. It is freezing." "It is not working," Jason said, his voice rising in panic. "There is no hole. There is no keyhole." He pounded on the door with his fist. "Open up," he screamed. "Dad, it is us! Open the goddamn door!" The sound of his fist against the solid wood was dull and heavy. There was no answer. The house was a tomb. Monica pushed past him. "Let me do it," she hissed. "You are useless." She grabbed the handle and rattled it. It was locked tight, bolstered by the deadbolts Sal had installed deep into the frame. She stepped back and looked at the house, really looked at it for the first time since they had arrived. Her eyes drifted to the right, to the large bay window of the living room. She gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Jason," she shrieked. "Look at the window." Jason turned. He saw what she saw. The beautiful floor-to-ceiling glass panes were gone. They were covered by sheets of raw, unpainted plywood nailed directly into the frame. It looked like a house preparing for a hurricane. It looked abandoned. It looked condemned. They ran to the other windows. The dining room. The library. The kitchen. Every single ground floor entry point was sealed shut with heavy timber. I had instructed the investor to board it up immediately upon closing, to prevent vandalism, citing a concern about disgruntled former occupants. I was the disgruntled occupant, and they were the vandalism I was preventing. "What is happening?" Jason yelled, spinning in a circle. "Is there a storm coming? Why is everything boarded up?" And then the wind gusted, blowing the snow across the front lawn. It cleared the view of a small red sign planted firmly in the frozen earth near the rhododendrons. It was not a subtle sign. It was a sign meant to be seen from the street. Sold. The letters were white block print on a red background. Above it, a writer strip read, "Sold as is, cash buyer." Jason stopped moving. He stared at the sign. He blinked as if trying to clear a hallucination. He walked toward it, his steps slow and heavy like a man walking to the gallows. He reached out and touched the plastic sign. It was real. It was cold. "Sold," he whispered. His voice cracked. He turned to Monica, his face a mask of absolute uncomprehending horror. He sold it. He actually sold it. "You are lying," Monica screamed. She ran to the sign and kicked it. It bent but didn't break. "You are lying. He can't sell it. It's our house. It's in the trust. He can't just sell it while we are on vacation." "He did," Jason said, the realization crashing down on him like a tidal wave. "That is why the cards stopped working. That is why he didn't answer. He liquidated the estate." The children began to cry louder, sensing the terror radiating from their parents. They were cold, hungry, and standing in front of a house that had rejected them. Jason ran back to the door. He didn't knock this time. He threw his entire body weight against it. He kicked it. He clawed at the biometric scanner until his fingernails broke. "Dad," he roared, a primal sound of rage and grief. "You open this door right now. You cannot do this to me. I am your son. I live here." He grabbed a heavy ceramic planter from the porch, one that Catherine had potted with mums every autumn. He heaved it through the air. It smashed against the plywood, covering the living room window. The wood splintered, but held. The noise triggered the new alarm system the investors had installed. A piercing, deafening siren erupted from the eaves of the house, cutting through the quiet neighborhood morning. Lights began to flash. Jason didn't stop. He was in a frenzy. He picked up a piece of the broken planter and started hacking at the wood, screaming obscenities, screaming my name, screaming for someone to wake up from this nightmare. But he wasn't asleep. He was wide awake in the hell he had created. Monica sat on one of the suitcases in the driveway and put her head in her hands. She didn't scream anymore. She just rocked back and forth, muttering to herself, "My clothes, my jewelry, my life. It's all gone." I watched from the screen, my pulse steady. I saw the neighbor's curtains twitching across the street. I saw the blue lights of a police cruiser turning the corner at the end of the block. The new owners monitored the alarm system. They had called the police for a break-in in progress. Jason was still hacking at the wood when the officers drew their weapons. He looked like a madman, sunburned, shivering, and violent, trying to break into a house he no longer owned. I took a sip of my coffee. The bitter warmth spread through my chest. They had wanted a home without a father. Now they had a father, but no home. The symmetry was perfect. The siren was not just a noise, it was a physical weapon. Sal had installed a commercial-grade system, the kind used for warehouses and vaults, designed to disorient and terrify. It shrieked from the eaves with a rhythmic, piercing wail that vibrated in the chest cavity. The strobe lights mounted under the gutters began to flash, turning the gray, snowy morning into a strobe-lit nightmare of blue and white. Jason did not stop. The noise seemed to sever the last tether holding his sanity together. He had picked up a heavy, jagged shard of the ceramic planter he had smashed moments ago. He was using it like a primitive axe, hacking violently at the plywood covering the bay window. Wood chips flew into his face. He was screaming, but the siren swallowed his voice. I could see his mouth opening wide, the veins in his neck bulging his face, a mask of purple rage and sunburned skin. He was attacking the house as if it were a living thing that had betrayed him. He managed to open a small gap in the wood. He jammed his fingers into the splintered hole and pulled. I saw the blood running down his hand, dark against the pale pine. He didn't seem to feel it. He was running on pure adrenaline and entitlement. He truly believed that if he could just breach the perimeter, if he could just step onto the Persian rug in the living room, the world would reset. He believed the laws of physics and property rights would bend around him, because he was a Blackwood. Monica had retreated to the sidewalk. She was shielding the children, pressing their faces into her sarong to block out the strobe lights. She was shouting at Jason, her mouth moving in a rhythm of panic, likely telling him to stop, to think, to realize that he was committing a felony in broad daylight. But Jason was beyond listening. He kicked the door again, leaving a muddy boot print on the finish. He threw his shoulder against the wood, bouncing off with a force that must have bruised the bone. Then the second element of the new security protocol engaged. The monitoring company, alerted by the perimeter breach and the glass break sensors, had dispatched the police with a Priority 1 code. A burglary in progress at a high-value estate. The first cruiser skidded around the corner, its tires crunching on the slush. It didn't use its siren. It didn't need to. The house was already screaming enough for the whole neighborhood. 2 officers jumped out before the car had fully stopped. They were not the friendly community liaison officers Jason might have expected. They were patrolmen responding to a violent intruder. Their hands were already on their holsters. "Drop the weapon," the lead officer shouted, his voice amplified by the adrenaline of the situation. He leveled his service weapon at my son. "Get on the ground, now!" Jason froze. He turned slowly, the ceramic shard still clutched in his bleeding hand. He looked at the gun pointed at his chest. He blinked, the snowflakes melting on his eyelashes. He didn't drop the shard. He didn't get on the ground. He stood there confused, as if the police were part of the misunderstanding. "It is my house," Jason yelled, taking a step toward the officers. "I live here. My dad is inside. He locked me out." "Stop moving," the officer roared, taking a tactical step back and tightening his grip on the firearm. "Drop the object or you will be tased." Jason looked at the shard in his hand, as if he had forgotten he was holding it. He dropped it. It shattered on the frozen driveway. "I live here," Jason screamed again, his voice cracking. "Ask anyone. Ask the neighbors. I am Jason Blackwood." The second officer moved in, flanking him. He didn't care about the name. He saw a man with bloody hands who had just destroyed property and was acting erratically. He saw a threat. "Turn around." "Hands on your head." Jason hesitated. It was a fatal second of indecision, born of a lifetime of never being told what to do. The officer didn't wait. He grabbed Jason's arm, spun him around, and kicked his legs apart. He slammed Jason face first onto the hood of the police cruiser. The cold metal must have burned his skin. "I am suing you," Jason shouted, his cheek pressed against the wet steel. "You can't touch me. Do you know who my father is?" It was the refrain of his life. "Do you know who my father is?" He used it to get out of speeding tickets. He used it to get table reservations. Now he was using it to try and talk his way out of a breaking and entering charge on a house I no longer owned. The officer yanked Jason's arms behind his back. The handcuffs clicked. It was a sharp metallic sound that cut through the wail of the alarm. Jason flinched. He began to sob. It wasn't a cry of remorse. It was the cry of a child who has finally been put in timeout. Monica ran toward them, dragging the screaming children. "Stop! You are hurting him!" she shrieked. "He lives here. We just got back from vacation. Look at our luggage. Look at the kids. We are not burglars." The first officer kept his gun low but ready. "Ma'am, step back. This property is flagged as vacant and under new ownership. The alarm company reported an unauthorized entry by hostile parties." New ownership. Monica gasped. She stopped running. She looked at the boarded windows. She looked at Jason, cuffed and crying on the hood of the car. No. No, that isn't possible. Bernard wouldn't. The officer ignored her. He patted Jason down, checking for weapons. He pulled Jason's wallet out of his pocket. He opened it and looked at the ID. "This ID says your address is in the city," the officer said. "This is not the address on your license." "We stayed here," Jason sobbed. "We lived upstairs. My dad, He what?" the officer asked, pulling Jason off the hood and marching him toward the back seat of the cruiser. "He went crazy," Jason yelled as he was shoved into the car. "He sold it. He sold it while we were gone." The officer slammed the door. He didn't believe him. Or maybe he just didn't care. To him, this was a domestic dispute gone wrong, or a squatter trying to reclaim a lost squat. Either way, Jason was in custody. The alarm finally cut off. The sudden silence was more jarring than the noise. The strobe lights stopped flashing, leaving the driveway in the gray, dull light of the winter morning. I watched from my laptop screen. I saw my son's face pressed against the window of the police car. He looked small. He looked terrified. He looked directly at the security camera as if he knew I was watching. Monica stood alone on the driveway, surrounded by 4 crying children and 5 luxury suitcases. The snow was falling harder now, accumulating on her bare shoulders. She looked at the house. She looked at the police car. Then she looked at the street, realizing for the first time that there was no one coming to help her. She had no car keys. She had no house keys. She had $300 and a husband in the back of a squad car. The officer approached her. "Ma'am, you cannot stay here. This is private property. The owner has requested that all trespassers be removed. You need to call a ride." "The owner," she whispered. I took a sip of my coffee. My hand was steady. The police had done their job. The investors had done their job. The system worked perfectly when you were the one pulling the levers. I watched as Monica pulled out her phone. Her fingers were shaking so hard she could barely type. I knew who she was going to call. She was going to call her mother. She was going to call her friends. But eventually she would realize that none of them could fix this. Then she did what I knew she would do. She dialed my number. My phone lit up on the desk. Monica. I watched it ring. I watched the face of the woman who had pawned my wife's pearls appear on the screen. I reached out and pressed the button to send it to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk, not yet. I wanted them to sit in the cold a little longer. I wanted the reality of the situation to settle into their bones like the frost on the ground. The police car pulled away, taking my son to the precinct for processing. Monica was left standing on the curb, waiting for an Uber she probably couldn't afford, staring at the plywood that sealed off her former life. The fortress was secure. The invaders had been repelled, and I had the best seat in the house. The fluorescent lights of the second precinct hummed with a headache-inducing buzz that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. The air smelled of stale coffee, industrial floor cleaner, and the sharp, sour tang of human desperation. I walked through the double doors, my cane tapping a steady, authoritative rhythm on the scuffed linoleum. Mr. Whitman walked beside me, his briefcase held like a shield, his face set in a mask of professional indifference. We were not there as worried parents coming to bail out a wayward child. We were there as the plaintiffs. I saw them immediately. Jason was handcuffed to a metal bench in the processing area, a place reserved for drunks and petty thieves. He looked small. The arrogance that usually puffed out his chest and made him walk with a swagger was gone, replaced by the slumped, caved-in posture of a man who had been stripped of his dignity along with his belt and shoelaces. His expensive linen shirt, bought for a tropical paradise, was stained with grease from the police cruiser's hood and dark patches of sweat. He looked up when he heard the distinctive click of my cane. His eyes widened, red-rimmed and frantic. For a split second, a wave of relief washed over his face. He thought the cavalry had arrived. He thought Daddy was here to write a check, yell at the sergeant, and make the bad men go away. "Dad," he croaked, standing up as far as the short chain would allow. "Thank God. You have to tell them. Tell them this is insane. Tell them I live there. Tell them it's all a misunderstanding." I stopped 5 feet away from him. I did not step into his personal space. I stood just outside the reach of his desperation, a deliberate distance that felt like an ocean. I looked at the officer at the desk, a sergeant I knew from the Rotary Club, a man who knew my reputation. "Sergeant," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the room, cutting through the background noise of radios and phones. "I am Bernard Blackwood. I am the former owner of the property at 42 Oak Lane. I am here to confirm that the individual in custody has no legal claim to the residence. He does not hold a lease. He does not hold a title. He was in fact trespassing on private property that he has been explicitly barred from." Jason's jaw dropped. The relief on his face curdled into a look of absolute betrayal, a look of a child who has just realized the monster in the closet is real. "What are you saying?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "I am your son. I have lived there for 5 years." I looked at him then. I really looked at him. I didn't see the boy I had taught to ride a bike. I saw the man who had pawned my wedding ring for pocket money. I saw the man who had left me a frozen dinner on Thanksgiving while he flew first class. You are a 42-year-old man who broke into a house he does not own, I said, my voice as cold as the winter wind outside. That makes you a criminal, Jason, not a son. You vacated the premises of your own accord. You abandoned your residency. And I sold the building. Monica was sitting on a plastic chair in the waiting area, huddled under a thin blanket, the children asleep in a pile of coats on the floor next to her. She looked ragged, her makeup smeared her hair a bird's nest of tangles. She jumped up when she heard my voice rushing the barrier like a cornered animal. "You sick old bastard!" she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at me, her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. "You set us up, you sold the house while we were in the air, you ruined everything. You are going to pay for this." I turned to her slowly. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. My silence was louder than her screaming. "I liquidated an asset, Monica," I said calmly. "Just like you liquidated my wife's jewelry. The difference is I owned the house. You did not own the pearls. You did not own the sapphire brooch. And you certainly did not own my wedding ring." She froze. The blood drained from her face, leaving her pale and ghostly under the harsh lights. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She knew. In that moment, she realized that I knew everything. The secret economy she had built on my grief was exposed. She stammered, looking around to see if the officers were listening, suddenly aware of her own legal peril. "I have the receipts," I said, tapping the breast pocket of my coat. "I have the box from under the floorboard. And I have the police report filed for grand larceny ready to be submitted. But I am a generous man. I am not pressing those charges today. Today I am simply returning your property." "My property?" she asked, confused, her eyes darting around. I nodded to the entrance. Sal pushed the double doors open with his shoulder. Behind him, two of his guys wheeled in a hand truck stacked high with brown cardboard boxes. They were heavy taped shut with aggressive amounts of gray duct tape bulging at the sides. They smelled of dust and the hasty, violent packing job I had supervised. Sal parked the dolly right in the middle of the precinct waiting room between the vending machine and the intake desk. He tipped it back and let the boxes slide onto the floor with a heavy final thud that shook the room. "What is this?" Jason asked from the bench, straining against his cuffs to see. "This is your life," I said, "or what is left of it." I pointed to the boxes with the tip of my cane. "Your clothes, your shoes, your electronics, your collections. It is all there." I had the movers pack everything from the second floor. Nothing was left behind. No socks, no toothbrushes, no pictures. Consider this the final distribution of the Blackwood estate. Monica stared at the boxes. She recognized the shape of things inside. She saw the corner of a designer dress poking out where the tape had split, wrinkled, and crushed. She saw the edge of a box that likely held her expensive creams, now leaking and broken. "You put my Chanel bags in a cardboard box," she whispered, her voice trembling with a materialistic horror that seemed to eclipse the fact that her husband was in handcuffs. "You ruined them. You crushed them." "They are just things, Monica," I said, echoing the exact words she had used when she broke my favorite coffee mug years ago and told me to get over it. "You can always buy more." "Oh, wait. You can't. Because I canceled the cards. And you have no job." Whitman stepped forward, smooth and lethal. He placed a document on top of the stack of boxes. "This is a restraining order," he said professionally. "It bars you from coming within 500 feet of Mr. Blackwood or his new residence. It also serves as formal notice that you have been removed as beneficiaries from the family trust due to criminal misconduct and gross ingratitude. You are on your own." Jason looked at the restraining order. He looked at the boxes. He looked at me. The reality was finally sinking in. There was no house to go back to. There was no bank account to draw from. There was just a pile of boxes on a dirty police station floor, a criminal record, and a winter storm outside. "Dad, please," he wept. the fight going out of him, his body sagging against the metal bench. "We have nowhere to go, the kids. We don't have any money. The kids are the only reason I am not having you charged with the theft of the jewelry right now," I said. "Figure it out, Jason. Get a job. Rent an apartment. Be a father instead of a dependent. For the first time in your life, save yourself." I turned my back on them. It was the hardest physical movement I had ever made, turning away from my own flesh and blood while they cried. But it was necessary. The umbilical cord had to be cut, even if I had to use a hatchet. "Where are you going?" Monica shrieked, her voice cracking. "You can't leave us here. I am going to dinner," I said without looking back. "I have a reservation, and I am paying with my own money." I walked out of the precinct into the cold, wet air. I heard Monica screaming my name behind the safety glass. I heard Jason sobbing. I heard the confused cries of my grandchildren waking up to a world where their grandfather was no longer a safety net, but a wall. Sal was waiting by the truck. He looked at me, his face grim. "Done?" he asked. "Done," I said. I got into the car. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I felt light. The weight of 40 years of carrying them was gone. I was just a man with a cane and a quiet life ahead of me. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to the silence. 3 weeks after I left my son and his wife standing in the cold. Outside a police station, a process server found me at the Ritz-Carlton. I was eating a grapefruit and reading the Wall Street Journal, enjoying the silence that money and solitude can buy. The young man looked apologetic as he handed me a thick envelope. He knew who I was. By now, half the city knew who I was. The story of the Thanksgiving eviction had circulated through the country clubs and boardrooms like a viral fever. Some called me a monster. Most called me a legend. I opened the envelope. It was not an apology letter. It was a lawsuit. Emergency motion for temporary guardianship and conservatorship. Plaintiff, Jason Blackwood. Defendant, Bernard Blackwood. I read the filing with the detached interest of a CEO reading a competitor's desperate press release. The document claimed that I, Bernard Blackwood, had suffered a sudden and catastrophic cognitive decline. It cited the rapid below-market sale of the family estate as primary evidence of financial incompetence. It cited my erratic behavior and hostility toward family members as evidence of paranoia and dementia. It requested that this court immediately freeze all my assets, annul the sale of the house, and appoint Jason Blackwood as my legal guardian to manage my affairs for my own protection. It was Monica. I could hear her voice in every legal phrase. This was her Hail Mary. She had realized that begging wouldn't work. She had realized that guilt wouldn't work. So now she was trying to legally declare me dead while I was still breathing. She didn't want a father for her husband. She wanted a vegetable she could harvest for cash. I called Whitman. "They took the bait," I said. "See you in court, Bernard," he replied. He sounded almost giddy. The hearing was scheduled for 2 days later. It was an emergency session granted because they had argued that I was a danger to my own estate. I walked into the probate court wearing my best charcoal suit, the one I used to wear to hostile takeover meetings. I did not bring a cane this time. I walked upright. I wanted them to see exactly who they were fighting. Jason and Monica were already there, seated at the plaintiff's table. They had tried to look the part of the concerned, grieving family. Jason wore a suit that was clearly too big for him now. He had lost weight from the stress of the last month. He looked pale, sweating despite the air conditioning. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at his hands, twisting a pen, looking like a man who was waiting for a bomb to go off, but hoping it would be a dud. Monica, however, was in her element. She wore a modest navy dress and pearls, fake ones, since she had pawned the real ones. She sat with her back straight, her chin high. When I walked in, she looked at me, not with fear, but with a smug, predatory confidence. She smiled. It was a small, tight smile that said, "We got you, old man. You made a mistake selling that house so cheap, and now we are going to use it to bury you. Their lawyer was a man named Prescott, a billboard attorney known for aggressive litigation and loose ethics. He stood up as the judge entered, smoothing his tie. He looked at me with pity, the kind of performative pity you give to a confused animal before you put it down. "Your Honor, Prescott," began his voice booming in the small courtroom. "We are here today because a tragedy is unfolding. My client, Jason Blackwood, loves his father deeply. For 40 years, Bernard Blackwood was a titan of industry. But age comes for us all." He gestured toward me as if I were an exhibit in a museum. On Thanksgiving Day, Mr. Blackwood suffered a severe psychotic break. In a fit of paranoia, he locked his own son and grandchildren out of their family home. But he didn't stop there. In a period of 48 hours, he sold a property appraised at $1.5 million for a mere $850,000. No rational man burns $600,000 of equity overnight. That is not a business decision, Your Honor. That is a symptom. That is the action of a man whose mind has been corrupted by dementia. Monica nodded solemnly from the table, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She was playing the heartbroken daughter-in-law who just wanted to save Grandpa from himself. Prescott continued building his narrative brick by brick. Mr. Blackwood has cut off contact with reality. He believes his family is stealing from him. He has hallucinations of persecution. He is currently living in a hotel, burning through his savings, vulnerable to predators. We are asking the court to intervene. We are asking for an emergency conservatorship to annul the sale of the house before it is too late, and to place control of the remaining assets in the hands of his only son, who only wants to protect his father's legacy. It was a good story. It was logical. If you didn't know the context, if you didn't know about the shoebox under the floorboards, you would believe them. You would look at the numbers, the fire sale price of the house, and you would agree that I must be crazy. They were banking on the numbers. They thought the sale price was their smoking gun. They thought their greed was invisible. I sat there silent and still. I watched Jason. He was shaking. He knew this was a lie. He knew exactly why I had sold the house. But he was too weak to stop it. He was letting Monica drive the bus, even as it sped toward a cliff. Monica leaned over and whispered something to Jason. She patted his hand. She looked at me again, her eyes gleaming. She really thought she had won. She thought that by painting me as incompetent, she could undo the last month. She thought she could get a judge to sign a piece of paper that would give her the keys to the kingdom back. She was already mentally decorating the house she thought she was about to reclaim. She was already spending the money she thought she was about to control. The arrogance was breathtaking. They hadn't learned a thing. They hadn't learned humility. They hadn't learned remorse. They had only learned to double down. They were so convinced of their own entitlement that they couldn't conceive of a world where I was one step ahead of them. They looked at a lion and saw a rug. Whitman leaned over to me. "Do you want to say anything before I start?" he whispered. I looked at the judge, a stern woman who was reading the complaint with a frown. I looked at Monica, whose smirk was growing wider by the second. "No," I whispered back. "Let them finish. Let them put it all on the record. I want them to be so high up that the fall breaks every bone in their bodies." The judge looked up over her spectacles. "Mr. Prescott," she said, "you are making serious allegations. Removing a person's autonomy is a drastic step. Do you have medical evidence? We have the evidence of his actions, Your Honor," Prescott said smoothly. "And we have the testimony of his family who have lived with him and watched his decline. We have an affidavit from his son stating that Mr. Blackwood has been forgetting things, acting aggressively, and making irrational financial choices for months." Jason flinched when his name was mentioned. He shrank into his chair. "Very well," the judge said. "Mr. Whitman, does your client wish to respond?" Whitman stood up. He buttoned his jacket slowly. He didn't look worried. He looked bored. "My client does wish to respond." "Your Honor," Whitman said, "but not with arguments. We prefer to respond with exhibits." Monica's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She looked at the stack of documents Whitman pulled from his briefcase. She looked at the small digital recorder he placed on the table. She looked at the orange Nike shoebox that sat on the floor just next to my feet. For the first time since the hearing began, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. It was the realization that in a room full of lawyers, she was the only one who didn't know the law of gravity. What goes up must come down. And they were about to come down hard. Whitman did not begin with an opening statement. He did not bore the court with platitudes about the dignity of the elderly or the sanctity of the family unit. He simply walked to the clerk's desk and placed a small silver flash drive on the polished wood. It made a sharp click that sounded like a pistol hammer being cocked. He asked for permission to play a video file. The judge nodded, and the large monitor mounted on the wall flickered to life. The grainy black and white footage from my security cameras filled the screen. The timestamp in the corner read 4 in the morning on Thanksgiving Day. The courtroom watched in silence as Jason and Monica dragged their suitcases down the stairs, laughing and whispering. The audio was crisp. Every person in the room heard Monica call my home a place of failure. They heard Jason joke about my hearing loss. They heard the slam of the door as they left me alone with a frozen dinner. I watched the color drain from Monica's face. She gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table, her knuckles turning white. The image of the grieving, concerned daughter-in-law was cracking like cheap porcelain. But Whitman was not done. He let the video play until the car drove away, leaving only the image of an empty, silent hallway. Then he stopped the playback. "Your Honor," Whitman said, his voice calm and resonant. "The plaintiff claims my client is suffering from paranoia and delusions of abandonment. As you can see, the abandonment was not a delusion. It was a scheduled departure." Prescott, their lawyer, jumped up. "Objection, this is irrelevant. A vacation does not prove competence." Whitman ignored him. He picked up the small digital recorder I had placed on the table. "Exhibit B," Whitman announced. "A voicemail received by my client on Thanksgiving Day shortly after he discovered unauthorized charges on his credit card." He pressed play. Monica's voice shrieked through the courtroom speakers, distorted by rage, but unmistakable. "You old bat! You ruined everything. Fix this right now, or you will never see these children again." The judge flinched. She looked from the recorder to Monica, her eyebrows knitting together in a frown of distaste. The contrast between the demure woman in the navy dress sitting at the table and the banshee on the recording was absolute. Monica looked down at her lap, unable to meet the judge's gaze. Jason put his head in his hands. "This establishes the tone of the relationship," Whitman said. "It is not one of caregiving. It is one of hostage-taking. But let us address the core of the plaintiff's argument. They claim that Mr. Blackwood's decision to sell his home was an act of financial incompetence, a fire sale driven by dementia." Whitman walked back to his briefcase. He pulled out the orange Nike shoebox. He did not treat it delicately. He dumped the contents onto the defense table. The pile of receipts slid across the surface, a chaotic mound of paper that represented the systematic looting of my life. "I would like to enter into evidence 53 separate transaction slips from Quick Cash Pawn," and Lone Whitman said. These receipts were found hidden beneath the floorboards of the plaintiff's bedroom in Mr. Blackwood's home. He picked up the top receipt and handed it to the bailiff to give to the judge. Item 1, Whitman read aloud. "A platinum and sapphire brooch, appraised value $15,000. Pawned by Monica Blackwood for $1,200 on November 20th. He picked up another. Item 2, a strand of South Sea pearls, pawned for $800. He picked up a third. Item 3, a men's gold wedding band inscribed Forever C and B, pawned by Jason Blackwood for $300 on November 22nd. The silence in the courtroom was no longer just quiet. It was heavy. It was the suffocating silence of a room where a crime has just been exposed. The judge held the receipt for my wedding ring. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at my hand resting on the table bare and ringless. She looked at Jason. Her eyes were no longer neutral. They were cold. Mr. Blackwood, the judge, addressed Jason, directly bypassing his lawyer. "Did you pawn your father's wedding ring?" Jason stood up. He was shaking. He tried to speak, but his voice failed him. He cleared his throat. "Your Honor, it was a temporary loan. We were going to get it back. We just needed liquidity." "Liquidity," the judge repeated the word, dripping with disdain. "You sold your father's wedding ring for $300 while living rent-free in his home. And now you are asking this court to give you control over the rest of his assets." She turned her gaze to me. "Mr. Blackwood," she said softly. "Why did you sell your house?" I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I looked her in the eye. I spoke clearly, without a tremor, without a pause. "Your Honor, I did not sell a home. I liquidated a liability. I discovered that I was harboring thieves. I discovered that my son and his wife were financing a lifestyle they could not afford by selling my past. I realized that as long as they had a roof over their heads provided by me, they would never stop. Selling the house was the only way to evict them legally and permanently. It was a strategic business decision to stop the bleeding of my estate." I paused, then added the final truth. "And frankly, Your Honor, after finding my wedding ring replaced by a hardware store washer, I could no longer sleep under that roof." The house was contaminated. The judge nodded slowly. She closed the file folder in front of her. She took off her glasses. She didn't need to hear a closing argument. She didn't need to deliberate. "Mr. Prescott," she said to Jason's lawyer, "I suggest you advise your clients to be very quiet." She banged her gavel. "This court finds no evidence of incompetence, dementia, or incapacity on the part of Bernard Blackwood. The motion for emergency guardianship is denied. The motion to annul the sale of the property is denied." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Furthermore, based on the evidence presented today regarding the pawned items, I am forwarding the transcript of this hearing and all exhibits to the District Attorney's Office for review regarding potential criminal charges for elder abuse and grand larceny." Monica gasped. She grabbed Jason's arm, her fingernails digging into his suit jacket. They had come here to take my money. Now they were leaving with a criminal investigation hanging over their heads. The judge looked at me. One last time. "Mr. Blackwood, you are free to go. And may I say I am sorry for your loss." She wasn't talking about my wife. She was talking about my son. "Thank you." "Your Honor," I said. I gathered my papers. I picked up the orange shoebox. I didn't look at Jason. I didn't look at Monica. I walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, my footsteps steady and sure. I heard Monica sobbing behind me, a sound of pure, selfish terror. I heard Jason trying to ask his lawyer if he was going to jail. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and walked out into the hallway. The air was cool and recycled, but to me it smelled like victory. Whitman was right behind me. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. "That went well," he said dryly. "It went exactly as planned," I replied. But we weren't done. The house was gone. The guardianship was dead. But there was one last loose end. One last piece of leverage that Jason still thought he had. He still thought he had a job. He still thought he was the CEO of Blackwood Logistics, a title I had given him 5 years ago when I retired to the chairman's seat. He thought his salary was safe. I checked my watch. It was 11 in the morning. The board meeting was scheduled for noon. "Let's go, Arthur," I said. "We have one more stop." We walked to the elevator. The doors opened and we stepped inside, leaving the ruins of my family behind us on the courtroom floor. The descent was smooth and fast. I was going down to the street, but Jason was going down much, much further. Jason caught up to us in the marble lobby of the courthouse, his breathing ragged and desperate. He looked like a man who had just survived a firing squad only to realize he was standing in a minefield. He grabbed my sleeve, his fingers digging into the fabric of the charcoal suit he had once admired. "Dad." "Wait," he gasped, ignoring Monica, who was lagging behind trying to fix her mascara. "I know you are angry. I know the house is gone. But listen to me. I still have my job. I am the CEO of Blackwood Logistics. I have a salary. I have a bonus coming. I can get an apartment. I can pay you back for the jewelry. Just give me time." I stopped and turned to face him. The lobby was crowded with lawyers and clients, but I created a bubble of silence around us. I looked at his hand on my arm until he released me. He was clinging to his title like a life raft in a hurricane. He truly believed that his corporate status was separate from his character. He believed that the business I built was his birthright, just like the house. "You do not have a salary, Jason," I said, my voice flat. "And you do not have a bonus." "What do you mean?" he asked, a nervous smile flickering on his face. "Of course I do. I run the company. You retired 5 years ago. I retired from the daily operations," I corrected him. "I did not retire from ownership. I retained 51% of the voting stock. And as the chairman of the board, I convened an emergency meeting this morning at 8 o'clock while you were sitting at the defendant's table." Whitman stepped forward. He did not reach for a briefcase this time. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a single white envelope. He handed it to Jason. It was not thick. It was thin. It was a single sheet of paper that weighed more than the building we were standing in. Jason opened it. His eyes scanned the page. His knees actually buckled. He had to lean against a pillar to stay upright. "Termination for cause," he whispered, reading the bold text. "Embezzlement." "While you were in Hawaii enjoying the beach on my credit card, I had the forensic accountants go through the books," I said. "I wanted to see how the man who makes $250,000 a year could be so broke he has to steal his mother's pearls." It did not take them long to find it. I stepped closer to him, invading his space for the first time. $200,000, Jason. Over 18 months. Fake invoices from shell vendors. Consulting fees paid to companies registered in Monica's maiden name. You were not just a bad son. You were a thief in a suit. You were stealing from the company that put food on your table to pay for gambling debts and handbags. Monica caught up to us just in time to hear the number. 200,000. She looked at Jason with a mixture of shock and recognition. She knew where the money had come from, but she hadn't known I would find it. "This is a lie," Jason stammered. "I can explain. It was just moving funds around." "It is a felony," I said. "And it is the reason you are fired. Effective immediately. Security has already cleared out your office. Your company car has been repossessed. Your corporate card is canceled. You are walking out of here with nothing but the suit on your back, and even that I paid for." Jason looked around the lobby as if looking for an exit, but there was nowhere to go. He had lost his home. He had lost his reputation. And now he had lost his career. The double kill was complete. I had stripped him of every unearned privilege he had ever hidden behind. "If you ever come near me or my property again," I added, leaning in close so only he could hear, "I will hand that forensic audit to the FBI. Do not test me, son. You have already failed the final exam." I turned and walked through the revolving doors into the bright winter sunlight, leaving him standing in the lobby, holding his termination letter like a death certificate. He was a CEO with no company, a homeowner with no house, and a son with no father. He was finally a self-made man. It had been exactly 30 days since the sale of the house closed. December had settled over the city with a brutal gray permanence, turning the streets into wind tunnels of biting cold. I was no longer watching the weather from a drafty Victorian estate in the suburbs. I was watching it from the floor-to-ceiling thermal windows of a penthouse apartment in the city center. I had rented it with a fraction of the proceeds from the house sale. It was modern, warm, and remarkably quiet. There were no creaking floorboards. There were no memories of a dead wife in the hallways. There was just clean white space and the hum of the city 20 stories below. I was setting the table for dinner. I had invited Sal and Arthur Whitman. It was a make-up Thanksgiving, a real one. I had roasted a turkey myself, basting it with butter and herbs, filling the apartment with the scent that had been missing a month ago. I was pouring the wine, a heavy Cabernet that needed to breathe, when the concierge buzzer rang. I walked to the wall panel. The video screen flickered to life, showing the vestibule downstairs. The camera lens was fish-eyed, but the distortion could not hide the misery of the two figures standing in the lobby. It was Jason and Monica. They looked like ghosts of the people who had flown to Hawaii. Jason was wearing a parka that looked 2 sizes too small, likely bought from a thrift store bin. His face was gaunt, covered in a patchy, unkempt beard that hid his weak chin, but highlighted the hollows of his eyes. He looked 10 years older. The swagger of the CEO was gone, replaced by the twitchy, nervous energy of a man who was looking over his shoulder for creditors. Monica was worse. The woman who used to spend 3 hours a day on her hair and makeup was unrecognizable. Her roots had grown out, a dark stripe invading the expensive blonde dye job she could no longer maintain. She wore a coat that was clearly not hers, something synthetic and puffy that she clutched tight around her throat. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her face was pale and chapped from the cold. I pressed the talk button. I did not buzz them in. "Yes," I said. They both jumped. They looked around, trying to find the speaker source before staring into the camera lens. "Dad," Jason said. His voice was cracked and dry. "The concierge said you live here. We need to talk. Please. It is Christmas next week." I leaned against the wall, holding my glass of wine. I did not feel the urge to open the door. I felt the same way I felt when I looked at a stranger on the street. A vague, distant pity, but no connection. "We have nothing to talk about, Jason," I said. "You received the restraining order. You are violating it by being here." "We have nowhere to go," Monica interrupted, pushing her face closer to the camera. Her eyes were wild. "We are living in a motel by the highway. The one with the bugs. The kids are sick, Bernard. Leo has a fever. We don't have health insurance anymore because Jason lost his job. We are eating noodles from a gas station." She pulled back, and for a moment she stepped aside to reveal the 4 children huddled on a bench in the lobby background. They looked tired. They looked confused. They were wearing coats that looked too thin for December. "Look at them," Monica sobbed. "They are your grandchildren. You cannot let them starve. You cannot be this cruel. We are sorry." "Okay, we are sorry about the house. We are sorry about the jewelry. We are sorry about everything. Just let us in. Just give us a check. Anything." I looked at the children. I felt a pang of sorrow for them. They were innocent collateral damage in a war their parents had started. But I knew that if I opened that door, if I wrote that check, I wouldn't be saving the children. I would be funding the addiction of their parents. I would be feeding the monster of entitlement that had already devoured 40 years of my life. "I am not cruel, Monica," I said, my voice steady. "Cruelty is stealing a grandmother's necklace to pay for a poolside cabana. Cruelty is leaving an old man alone on a holiday. Cruelty is teaching your children that theft is a lifestyle." "Dad." "Please," Jason begged, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the melted snow on his cheeks. "I will do anything. I will work in the mailroom. I will sweep floors. Just help us get back on our feet. I cannot provide for them. I don't know how." You are 42 years old, Jason, I said. It is time you learned. I reached for a manila envelope I had left on the console table by the door. I had kept it there for this exact moment. I knew they would come. Desperation makes people predictable. I have something to show you, I said. I held the envelope up to the camera lens. What is that? Jason asked, squinting. Is that a check? No, I said. It is a receipt. A receipt for a transaction that never happened. I opened the envelope and pulled out a stapled document. It was a purchase agreement for a property in the suburbs. A brand new construction. 5 bedrooms, 3 baths, a big yard, a good school district. Do you see the date on this contract, Jason? I asked. He leaned in. November 22nd, he whispered. The day before Thanksgiving. I nodded. I bought this house on November 22nd, I said. I paid the deposit. I signed the papers. It was supposed to be a surprise. I was going to put the keys in a box and give them to you at Thanksgiving dinner. It was going to be yours, paid for, free and clear, a fresh start for you and the kids so you could move out of my house and build your own life. Monica let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. She covered her mouth with her hands. Her eyes were wide with the realization of what she had lost. 5 bedrooms, I continued, twisting the knife. Granite kitchen, a playroom for the kids. It cost $600,000. I was ready to hand it to you. All you had to do was show up for dinner. All you had to do was be a decent son for one single day. I turned the page to the last sheet. It was a cancellation notice. Dated November 23rd, Thanksgiving morning. But then I woke up to an empty house, I said. I woke up to a stolen credit card and a frozen lasagna. So I called the builder and I canceled the contract. I lost the deposit. But it was worth it. Jason slid down the wall of the lobby until he was crouching on the floor, his head in his hands. He was weeping uncontrollably now, a sound of pure, unadulterated regret. He realized that his greed hadn't gained him anything. It had cost him everything. He had traded a mansion for a week in a hotel he couldn't afford. You traded a lifetime of security for 5 days in Hawaii. I said, my voice low and final. That is the worst business deal I have ever seen. And you made it all by yourself. No, Monica whispered. No, please. We can fix it. We can still take the house. You can buy it again. It is sold, I lied. Just like the estate. Just like my wedding ring. It is gone. I looked at them one last time. A broken man and a shattered woman realizing that the golden goose hadn't just stopped laying eggs. It had flown away. Go home, Jason, I said. Oh, that is right. You don't have one. I reached for the button to end the call. Dad! Jason screamed, looking up at the camera one last time. Dad, don't goodbye, son, I said. I pressed the button. The screen went black. The image of their misery vanished, replaced by the smooth, dark glass of the monitor. The silence returned to the penthouse. It wasn't lonely. It was heavy with closure. I stood there for a moment, letting my heart rate slow down. I felt a deep, vibrating sense of peace settling into my bones. The cord was cut. The ledger was balanced. I turned away from the door. I walked back into the dining room. The chandelier cast a warm golden light over the table. The turkey was carved. The wine was breathing. Sal and Arthur were standing by the window looking out at the city lights. They turned when I entered. They saw my face. They didn't ask what happened. They knew. Everything all right? Bernard Sal asked, pulling out a chair. Everything is perfect, Sal, I said. I sat down at the head of the table. I picked up my linen napkin and placed it on my lap. I looked at the feast before me. It was hot. It was fresh. It was paid for with money that was safe from thieving hands. I lifted my glass of wine. Sal and Arthur lifted theirs. To family, Arthur said, hesitating slightly. I smiled. I looked at the two men who had helped me reclaim my life, the locksmith and the lawyer, the men who had answered the call when my own blood had run. To the family we choose, I corrected him. We clinked glasses. The crystal rang out with a pure, clear note. I took a sip. The wine was excellent. Outside, the winter wind howled against the glass, searching for a way in, but finding none. I cut a piece of turkey and took a bite. It was the best Thanksgiving dinner I had ever had. Looking back at that frozen Thanksgiving, I learned the hardest lesson a parent can face: you cannot save someone who refuses to save themselves. For years, I thought love meant shielding my son from reality, but I was only funding his entitlement. I realized that dignity has no price tag, and respect cannot be bought. If you have to pay for your seat at the table, you are not a guest. You are a sponsor. True family isn't defined by blood, but by loyalty. Sometimes the only way to find peace is to close the door on those who only know how to take. If you agree that respect must be earned and never inherited, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where justice is finally served.